Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I ever got stuck in pitch black darkness with no light source whatsoever, I would pretty much have no choice but to stumble around in the dark and hope that I eventually found my way to some place that had light. And this is much the same for VR. If you're going to be developing a VR game with any sort of dark environment, such as in a horror game, having some kind of light source that you can carry around with you is very useful to have. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a very simple flashlight that you can set up and even trigger to turn on and off when moving around in a VR game. But before we go ahead and jump to that, if you enjoyed this video and want to see even more just like this one, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And with that, let's jump right into the video. So let's go and get started by setting up our flashlight here. So I'm going to open up our content browser. I'm going to create a new folder here called interfaces. This is going to be what we're going to set first, is an interface. And in here, I want to add a blueprint interface. I'm going to call this grab. Now, if you watched a lot of my previous tutorials where grabbing objects is involved, you're probably fairly familiar with how I'm going to start by setting up this interface. But I'm going to be adding in an additional function, and I'll get to that in just one sec. But first, let's start with the usual. I'm going to set up a grab function. I'm going to give that an input. I'm going to call this input motion controller. And I'm going to make this a motion controller component object reference. Then I'm also going to create a second function here called release. And this will also have an input. This will also be a motion controller component object reference. And I'm just going to, again, rename that to motion controller. Now, I want to add in a third function here. And depending on your setup, you may even find that maybe better to add this to a second interface and have multiple interfaces that are binded to your flashlight. But because we're only adding in a single function, then I didn't really think that it was worth adding in a whole new interface for this. This third interface I'm going to call interact. And this is what we're going to use in order to actually turn on and turn off our flashlight, actually be able to turn it on and off when we press our trigger. And we'll get to that we'll get to actually calling that once we're actually in our player. So I'm going to compile and save all that and jump back into our VR template map. Now in here, now we can start working on our flashlight. I'm going to create another new folder called blueprints. Open that up. And I'm going to create a blueprint class that's going to be an actor. And I'm going to call this flashlight. And we can go and open that up. Now in here, you may have different setups depending on if you have, for example, a lantern or a torch over a flashlight. But I'm going to be setting up just a very basic flashlight for this example. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to set up a cylinder in our actor here. This cylinder is really going to be what we're actually going to grab, and it's going to help us actually visualize where our flashlight actually is in the world, rather than just having a light that may not always be actually visible. So I'm going to also go and scale this down a bit. Let's maybe do like 0.25 by 0.25. I think that's pretty good. And that is going to be what our flashlight basically looks like. This is what we're actually going to grab. This is what we're actually going to see in the world. Now going on from this, I'm also going to add on a second component here. This is going to be a light. And like I said, if you're going to be using something like a lantern, you may find that it's better to use something like a point light. Because I'm going to be using just a generic flashlight that's going to have a single direction that we're going to be able to shine a light at, I'm going to set up a spotlight here. I'm going to move this up to the top. Let's move it a little bit higher up. I don't want to move it up too much higher, so maybe like 55. And I also want to rotate this, that way this is pointed up. And that's 90 on our Y, our pitch, in order to actually have that pointed up in the up direction. Now, here you have a lot of variety in what you can do depending on how you want your flashlight to look, how you want it to function, how far you want the light to go. If you want to increase, for example, the intensity, if you want to change the light color. You can also set up an inner cone angle. Personally, I like to. I'm going to set maybe one for 25 as our inner cone. Maybe you want to set up some light function materials, so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through all this kind of stuff. All of this, it can be set up exactly how you want, depending on how you want your flashlight to look, how you want to function. So before we jump into our event graph, I'm also going to jump into our class settings and I'm going to add in our grab interface. Now that we have our component set up and we now have our interface implemented into our class, now we can move on to our event graph. And this is honestly all going to be fairly simple. We're not going to be overcomplicating this. So I'm going to start by deleting our event begin play, our begin overlap, and our tick. We're not going to be using any of these three. We're really only going to be doing things using our interface. So they're only going to be triggered when we need them. So I'm going to go and implement our events here. I'm just going to implement these one at a time and go and space those out a bit too. There we go. And we'll work our way top bottom as you see it here. So I'm going to go and start with our grab here. So I'm going to take our motion controller, and the first thing I want to do is I want to promote this to a variable. We're going to be using this in the release stage. This is going to be used in order to actually verify when we're releasing our flashlight that the correct hand is releasing our flashlight. And I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to attach actor to component. The parent or the target actor is going to be ourselves. Our parent actor is going to be the motion controller that we just got from our grab. So that's going to be passed in there. And this is all going to be largely dependent on you. I'm going to set these all to keep world. What this will do is it'll make it so that way whatever orientation our flashlight is, basically relative to our hand, it's going to maintain that same orientation. If you want for it to maybe lock to a position in your hand, so that way it's always pointed in the same direction, based off of how your motion controller is oriented, then you may want to snap this to a target. Maybe you want to attach it to a socket and snap it to a target even. That's entirely up to you. I'm just going to keep this nice and simple. I'm just going to make sure that this attaches to our motion controller component, and it's just going to keep that same orientation that we're grabbing it at. Moving on to our release down here. Our release is going to have just a little bit more. I'm going to take our motion controller that we got from up here in our event grab, and I'm going to check to see if the stored motion controller that we got from up here is the same as the motion controller we are getting from our release. The reason for this is a great way in order to check to make sure that the correct hand is releasing our flashlight. If we were to, for example, grab onto the flashlight with our left hand, then grab with our right hand, and then release with our left hand, then that left hand being released could actually trigger the flashlight to release, even though it's no longer in our left hand. So this is just a nice simple way in order to make sure that the correct hand is releasing our flashlight. So that explanation out of the way, we're going to go ahead and then branch off here. And the last thing we're just going to do is I'm going to detach from actor. And again, well, first off, that's going to be true. And then I'm just going to set these all to keep world. I don't want these to be set to keep relative. And that is everything that we need here for our grab and our release. Now finally, for our interaction, for our event interact, this is where we're actually going to control turning on and off our spotlight here. So I'm going to start by getting our spotlight. And I want to check to see if it is visible. And I'm going to feed that through a branch. There we go. Now, what this will actually do is if our spotlight is visible, it will actually generate a light. It will actually be visible and we'll actually be able to see our light shine on in a location, depending on wherever our flashlight is actually pointed. So we can use this in order to check to see if our flashlight is currently on or if it's currently off. Now, assuming that it is visible, so let's go ahead, let's bring through a set is visible, or set visibility, that's what it's called. I'm going to set a reroute node over here. Now, if this is in fact visible, that's going to come through the true, and we want to make sure that our new visibility is set to false, because now we're going to turn it off. We've already confirmed that our flashlight is on. Alternatively, let me go ahead and grab another set visibility. Visibility, there we go. Alternatively, if our flashlight is off, which is what our false will do, then we're going to set our visibility back to on. So this will just kind of allow for us to alternate between. It's a very simple check to see if our flashlight is already on, If it is or if it's not, then we determine what we want to do, if we want to turn it on or off. So I'm going to go and compile and save all that. And now we can move on to our player. Our player is going to be our player is going to be where we control our grabbing and where we're actually going to control when we interact with our flashlight. So here in our player, we're going to do just a couple things. So I'm going to go ahead and grab our grab left and our grab right. We're going to be using each of these. And let me go and bring this down first. I'm also going to go ahead and grab our trigger left and our trigger right. This is what I'm going to choose to bind our turning on and off for our flashlight. So what I'm going to do here is, if you want, you can use completely different buttons. You can use different input actions, whatever works for you. But what I'm going to be doing is, in our grab left and our grab right, this is where we're going to actually be able to grab on to our flashlight, as well as release. We're going to also be releasing it on released. In our trigger left and our trigger right, this is where we're actually going to run that interact event, and that's going to actually be used in order to turn on and off our flashlight as we choose. So let's go and start up here with our grab left and our grab right. This is where we're going to have quite a bit more going on than what we're going to have down here. This is going to be pretty simple. So we'll start up here. So I'm going to start by sphere overlap actors. And this is going to be fed through our press. For our sphere position, since we're dealing with grab left, I'm going to grab our motion controller left, and I'm going to get world location, and that's going to go into our sphere position. Our sphere radius, I like to set to a 20. So I find that's a pretty good starting point. Our object type, I'm going to make an array, and I'm going to set this to world dynamic. And this is actually what our flashlight's currently set to by default. If you decide to mess around with collision settings and all that, you may find that it's not world dynamic you need. And then that's all that we need here. So from here, on our out actors, I'm going to run this through a for each loop with a break. And the reason for this is I'm going to keep this nice and simple. Once we find any object that we can grab into, I'm simply going to break out. If you want, you can take this a step further and find out whichever actor is the closest and use that one to grab onto. I just find that this is much simpler, and since we're only going to have one object we can grab anyways, at least for this example, then it's really not worth going through the whole process of checking distance on every single actor we overlap with. So from here, I'm going to check if it does implement interface. And we want to check to see if it implements that grab interface that we had made from the beginning. And then in our loop body, we're going to branch. Now, assuming that it does, it means that this is an actor that we are able to grab. It means that it has our grab interface, it's able to be grabbed, released, and possibly even interacted with, assuming that our event interact is actually enabled and it's actually implemented into that actor. So I'm going to take our array element. Let me first start by rerouting a couple nodes down here around the bottom, because that's just going to help keep things a little bit smoother here. So from here, I'm going to promote this to a variable. There we go, and that's going to be on true. I'm going to rename this real quick to left grab actor. And before we go back to our break, I'm going to then run our grab event. So that should be up here, up top. Where did it go? Grab. Oh, here it is. So it's near the bottom. You want this grab message. And you should actually see too, it should say target is grab. That's what you want. It should say target is and then the name of whatever interface you're using. So if it does say that, then that means you're using the correct event. And then for a motion controller, we're again just going to take our motion controller left, and that's going to be passed through into our motion controller. Then we're just going to take this execution node and bring this around to break. And again, just to help keep things looking nice, I'm going to reroute this over the top of our events here. And that's all that we need for a grab. For a release, it's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to first get our left grab actor. And then what I actually want to do is I want to right click and I want to convert this to a validated get. This will help us check to make sure that this is valid first, because that's what we want to make sure of. So assuming that this is valid, we're going to release, and again, you want to make sure that's release message, and again, you want to make sure that the target is motion controller. And then I'm going to pass through our motion controller left into that motion controller, and then we will just set our left grab actor there. And that's all that we need to do there. So I'm going to go and copy all of this. There we go. And I'm going to bring this around here. I'm going to do a few modifications here because we need to change some of our references we have here. So I'm going to change this to motion controller right for our get world location there. Just about all this is going to change, so I'll come back to this in just 1 second. But coming over here, I'm going to again take our motion controller left. I'm going to change that to motion controller right. And then I again want to promote this to a variable. So I'm going to delete this left grab actor and change this to right grab actor. There we go. Pass that through true, execution goes into grab, and our right grab actor goes into target. And then coming back here for our released, we again need to do what we did up top right here, but this time we need to do it with our right grab actor instead of our left. So I'm going to again convert this to a validated get, pass through a released, and I'm going to run release message. And then again, I'm going to set our right grab actor back to null. So I jumped back in here because I realized that something was going wrong with the right grab. Do make sure that you have motion controller right set here. I guess I had forgotten that. I don't know if I just rushed through and just wasn't paying attention or like what went on, but I did forget to pass through the right motion controller into our release. Do make sure that you do that. Otherwise you will have issues and you won't be able to actually release from your right hand. You'll only be able to grab, and then it'll just kind of be stuck there. So just make sure you double check that. All right, now we can work on our trigger left and our trigger right. This is where we're going to actually control turning on and off our flashlight. And this is going to be fairly simple. So I'm gonna go and start by setting up our trigger left here. So I'm going to grab our left grab actor. And first I actually want to check to make sure that this is valid. Otherwise we could get errors or warnings if we're not checking this first. And then once we have our left grab actor through, we're going to run interact. And that is really all that we have to do in order to actually trigger that interact. It's really simple, really easy to do. Now I'm just going to do the same thing over here with our right grab actor. I'm again going to convert it to validated get. And again, I'm just going to run interact. And it's really as simple as that. So that's really all that we need to do here for our flashlight itself. So I'm going to go and compile and save all that. And let me go and close out of our VR Pond 2. And now in our scene, I'm going to drop our flashlight in. That is quite big. Let me go ahead and scale that down quite a bit. So maybe do like 0.2. That pretty good? Ooh. I think that should be pretty good. So I'm going to go and leave that as 0.2. I'm also going to set up real quick just a dark little hole that we can use in order to actually easily see our flashlight working. So I'll go and do that real quick here. All right, so this is the environment that I set up just real quick. As you can see, I didn't do too much to it. I've taken the sun. It is no longer actually visible, so that kind of helped dim the environment a little bit more. So we should be able to see it somewhat on the ground or, well, to be honest, we don't have anything else. But if we had anything else in the scene, we should have been able to see it at least somewhat there. But I've also set up this little hole here that's much darker, and you can actually already see too, we can actually see where the light source itself is hitting. And you can see too, if I move it around, you can see that light source moving around. So I'm gonna go and jump into VR, and then we can actually have a look and see how this all looks when we're actually in a VR headset. So let me go ahead and do that. So I do just want to point out, this is just my own personal thoughts on this. I do quite like like this starry night sky that that you get in Unreal with the sky sphere. Definitely does look really nice. But anyways, no longer being sidetracked by the night sky. We can now see, here's our flashlight. As I pointed out in the scene, you can actually see where the light source is hitting. It's directly above the flashlight here, and you can actually see too, I can stick my motion controller in the way and create a shadow there. So if I go and grab it, you can see that our light source moves around, and I don't know how clearly it'll show up in the recording, but I can actually just barely see where the inner cone of our flashlight actually ends. If you want, of course, you can you can modify that. You can remove the inner cone altogether. You can also increase intensity and things like that. But you can see I can move it around freely. I can swap hands. I can press trigger to turn it on and off. And if I leave it off, it'll stay off. And if I pick it up with my other hand, you can see, again, it'll still work as expected. Now, part of the reason I put this just darker space here is because I knew it would show up a little bit better. If I actually go and shine it here on the ground, you can definitely still see it, but it's not as clear, especially if I start pointing it a little further out. You can see it quite a bit clearer, closer to me it gets, but about there is where you kind of don't see it as much. It's not quite as useful. Here you can definitely see it much clearer, and like I said, you can throw other meshes or anything in the way of the light if you want to create like a shadow or whatever. But yeah, so there you go. So this is our flashlight. It works pretty simple. And with that, that's how you set up a very simple flashlight that you can use in any VR game. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe button down below. And I also want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters who you should see over here on the right hand side. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.